And welcome back. I want to give you guys an update regarding the Florida housing market. This is because the Florida Association of Realtors just announced February's stats yesterday. So in today's video, I explain what's happening right now regarding home sales, home prices, housing inventory, and much more for the Florida housing market. So I have a lot to cover in today's video. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So here's a report from the Florida Realtors Association. And by the way, this report here only covers existing single-family houses only. Single-family houses only for the state of Florida as a whole. And by the way, at the end of this video, I'm going to explain how each of the major metros in Florida compares, because obviously every housing market's different and there's some very big differences here. So let's first talk about closed home sales. And then for each of these metrics right here, I'm going to go over in great detail what is transpiring over the past few years. So for closed home sales, that decreased by 21.3%. Those are closed home sales in the state of Florida for February 2023 compared to 12 months ago. So for all cash transactions, in other words, home buyers who are using cash in order to buy houses, not using a loan, a decrease of 27.2%. Here's one metric I'm going to be kind of diving a little bit more deeper into in today's video, because this is the year-over-year change in the median sold price in Florida, a gain of only 3.5%, going from $381,000 to $395,000 this February. So stay tuned here in just a little bit, because I'm going to be sharing how the peak we saw last year, which in Florida was back in June, how that compares to prices right now. And I'll compare that to the national averages as well. In regards to the median percent of original list price received, I actually really love how they share the original list price versus the final sales price, and not the final asking price compared to sales price. So this actually includes price reductions, right? So the original list price to sales price ratio was 95.3%. A better way to describe this is that this means that homes that sold this February sold for 5% below the seller's original asking price. 1 year ago, houses on average were selling for the original asking price. Now here's where it gets really spicy here. The median days in the market is at 43 days. 1 year ago, it was only 12 days. That's a giant increase of 258% over the past 12 months alone, going from 12 days to 43 days. And by the way, that 43-day figure here is a time frame when the house is listed for sale to when they accept an offer from a home buyer. That's 43 days on average this February. Also for new pending home sales, that decreased by 11.6%. Approximately 12% fewer contracts being signed between buyers and sellers compared to February 2022. In regards to new listings are decreasing by 13% on a year-over-year basis. So just like the nation's average, we're seeing decreases of contracts being signed, but also decreases of new listings as well. Kind of a tug and pull amongst home buyers and home sellers as well. Down 12.6% for new listings. Now take a look at this though, because even though new listings, which obviously increases housing inventory, even though new listings are down by 12.6%, active listings or housing supply have increased by 131.4%. This of course means that home buying demand is decreasing, houses are obviously taking longer to sell, and we're seeing fewer contracts being signed between buyers and sellers, and that's why we're seeing this huge increase by 131%. 131% gain from February of 2022. Also, the month supply, 1 year ago, look at this, the month supply was 0.9 months. Now it's 2.7 months. So at 2.7 months, this is still within a reasonable range of the month supply, but a giant increase compared to February last year, a 200% increase over that time period. Before I share how each of these metrics compares to years past, and each of these metrics, I'm going to be sharing how it compares to 2019 through right now. So before I share that, I want to share this with you guys, and this is actually very, very important. When I'm talking about any metric that has to do with a closed home sale, that's a lagging indicator of our U.S. housing market. So when talking about a closed home sale for February, that's when contracts were signed in December as well as January. So when those contracts were signed, let's just say in mid-December, for example. Mid-December, rates were around 6.2%. We did have a time period in late December when rates were around 6.5%. That was more or less only for 1 week. Then rates decreased to 5.99% by the time we hit February 2nd. So because we're talking about closed home sales in a lot of these metrics in today's video, this again is based on contracts being signed when rates for the most part were actually in the low sixes. So for average 30-year fixed rate mortgages, that was averaging in the low sixes in December and January this year here. So I mentioned that because rates absolutely skyrocketed ever since then. So I would imagine that the stats we're sharing in today's video is based on two things that you guys should be aware of. Obviously, one is seasonality of our housing market, where our housing market tends to increase in January and February each year, especially after winter months. Number two is that rates were so much lower on average in December and January compared to February, for example. So because rates decreased in December and January, and also due to our seasonality of our housing market, just keep that in mind when I share today's stats with you guys in today's video. Having said that, let's talk a little bit more about closed home sales in the Florida real estate market. Again, a huge decrease, down by 21.3%, which is obviously a substantial decrease compared to 1 year ago. Having said that, this is the lowest decline on a year-over-year basis since August last year, a decrease of 21%. Back in August, it was a decrease of almost 16%. But at 21% for February, this is much lower than September last year through January this year. And here's a chart showing closed home sales by month going back to 2019. Now, here's something I found to be very interesting is that when looking at each February each year, we did see a slight increase in home sales every single year, going back to 2019, which is obviously entirely normal to see an increase in home sales in January, February, March due to our seasonality of our housing market. Now, having said that, when looking at closed home sales this February compared to the past few years, we're at the lowest number of sales for a February since approximately February of 2019. This is because back in 2022, there was over 20,000 closed home sales. The same for 2021. 2020 in February, just over 20,000 closed home sales. But in February of 2019, just under 20,000. In regards to cash sales, that decreased again by 27.2% compared to February of 2022. But when looking at this chart right here, this again is for February 2023. When looking at this chart right here, the number of cash sales is more or less on par with pre-COVID levels. This is because this February, there was just under 6,000 cash sales this February, which is more or less on par with what we saw back in 2019 through the first quarter of 2020. In regards to the percentage of cash sales, approximately 31.3% of all home sales came from a cash buyer. What's interesting about this is, not that, right here, is that the percentage of cash sales at around 30% has been more or less flat ever since 2021. Something I found to be kind of remarkable here as well is that when looking at 2020, obviously back in March and April of 2020 was more or less the onset of COVID here. Cash sales were around 20% in April of 2020. Then it skyrocketed all the way until we hit, February of 2021, when the percentage of cash sales was around 30%. And again, ever since then, the percentage of cash sales has been more or less in the range of 30 to around 35%. All right, changing gears slightly here, let's talk about home prices for the state as a whole in Florida. The median sold price this February was $395,000, an increase of 3.5% compared to February of 2022. There's a few things I want to talk about because this is actually a slight increase compared to January. In January, the median sold price was just under $390,000. Now it's $395,000. However, since June, and by the way, that was when we reached all-time record highs at $420,000, this means the median sold price in Florida has decreased by 6.2%. 6.3% since June of last year. Now, having said that, for the nation as a whole, for June through February this year, for the nation as a whole, the median sold price in the US has decreased by 9%, whereas in Florida, it has decreased by 6.3%. One more thing I do want to point out regarding home prices in Florida is that obviously if you're a home buyer looking to buy a house in the state here, a decrease of 6% compared to June is obviously a step in the right direction. However, though, I have to say this, and let's just be real here, because prices in Florida have been absolutely skyrocketing ever since really 2020. So when looking at home sold prices back in, let's call it February of 2019, compared to February this year, in other words, over the span of 4 years, prices have increased in Florida by about 60%. This is because back in February of 2019, the median sold price in Florida was approximately $250,000. Now it's $395,000, a gain of around 60%. So not only did prices increase by that much, but also rates have been absolutely skyrocketing since then as well. Because in February 2019, rates or average rates for 30-year fixed hovered around 4.5%. But at the time of this video, rates are around 6.5%. All right, changing gears again, let's talk about the median percent of original list price received. A better way to say this again is that in February, houses on average sold for 5% below the seller's original asking price. The significance regarding this is that houses on average have been selling for less than the seller's asking price ever since August last year. So for the past 7 months, houses on average selling less than this seller's asking price, which is much different compared to the spring and summer months of 2022, when on average, houses were selling for the seller's asking price. I also want to share the median days on the market because that is at 43 days. And this, by the way, is the number of days between the initial listing of a property and the signing of a contract between the buyer and seller, which eventually leads to the closing of the sale. So this is the number of days in which a home seller lists their home for sale to when they accept an offer from a home buyer. That's 43 days, a giant increase of 258% from 12 months ago. Because 12 months ago, days in the market was only 12 days. Now it's 43 days. And here's a chart at the bottom here showing days in the market at 43 days right now. This has been more or less increasing at a very steady clip ever since really August last year. Having said that, at 43 days, this is much higher compared to 2022 and 2021. However, it's very close to levels in 2020 as well as 2019. And in fact, when looking at February of 2020, days in the market was approximately 50 days. And in February of 2019, days in the market was approximately 54 days. So again, days in the market is much higher compared to the past couple of years, but actually a little bit below levels compared to February 2019 and 2020. In regards to new pending home sales, and this, by the way, is the number of listed properties, houses for sale, that went under contract during the month of February here. So new pending home sales decreased by 11.6%. At 25,056 is the number of new pending home sales for February, which, by the way, this is actually the biggest amount of contracts being signed ever since August of last year. Something else that caught my attention as well is that new pending home sales have been now increasing for 2 consecutive months. In my personal opinion, this is due to more about our seasonality of our housing market, where we tend to see an increase in home buying demand in January through the spring months, and especially after December. Now, having said that, even though contracts being signed have been increasing for 2 consecutive months, look at this giant decrease on a year-over-year basis, because contracts being signed compared to the same time frame 1 year ago have been decreasing by double digits for at least the past 12 months. Also, when looking at this chart below right here, the number of new contracts being signed at 25,000, this of course is below levels in 2022, but also 2021 and before that as well. 2021 this time, there was actually over 30,000 new pendings. In 2020 at this time, there was just under 30,000. And then in February of 2019, it was also around 25,000. So the current levels right now at approximately 25,000 is more or less on par with February of 2019. In regards to new listings, which of course is the number of properties that were put up for sale for the month, that decreased again by 12.6%, a decrease of new listings down by approximately 13%. What's really interesting to me regarding this is that even though new listings have been decreasing for 7 consecutive months, going back to August of 2022, at least decreases on a year-over-year basis, housing inventory has increased by 131%. So again, even though new listings have been decreasing on a year-over-year basis for 7 consecutive months, housing inventory has increased by 131% compared to February of 2022. Additionally, look at this chart below here as well, because this February is actually the lowest number of new listings for a February since at least 2019. Back in 2021 this time, there was just under 30,000 new listings. Now there's approximately 25,000. In 2020, there was also approximately 30,000, as well as 2019 as well, just over 30,000. Speaking of housing inventory, that again has increased by 131.4%. And in fact, has been growing by triple digits for the past 4 months in a row. What's crazy about this is that even though we've been seeing triple digit year-over-year increases for the past 4 months in a row, inventory levels have been falling for the past 3 months in a row. In other words, inventory levels in Florida have been decreasing ever since December last year. Also, the current levels right now at just over 62,000 houses for sale is the lowest number of housing supply in Florida since July of last year. I also want to share this with you guys as well. Here's the month supply. Again, it's at 2.7 months. Still, historically speaking, this is very, very low, but compared to 2022 and 2021, we're at very high levels. So again, an increase of 200% from 1 year ago, but at 2.7 months, this again is much lower than 2019 and 2020, even though it's a huge increase compared to the past couple of years here. So at 2.7 months, going back to February of 2020, there was actually over a 3-month supply. Back in February 2019, the month supply was actually over 4 months. Now, before I share how each of the major metros in Florida fares, especially regarding prices, I also want to share this with you as well. This is a look at traditional home sales, which is obviously not a distressed home sale, and also foreclosures and short sales. So short sales for February, there's only 17 for the entire state for the month. For foreclosures and REOs, or real estate owned properties, which are more or less foreclosures sold by real estate agents, representing banks, of course, there's approximately 108 foreclosures or REOs for February. Now compare this to a traditional sale, again, not a foreclosure and not a short sale, there was actually 18,502. So in other words, distressed home sales in the state of Florida have been more or less non-existent in February. The Florida Realtors Association also provided data based on each of the metros they track. And I found this to be kind of remarkable because, as I always say, every housing market's different and real estate is local. So take a look at this. Cape Coral, Florida, and also Fort Myers, which is obviously impacted by the hurricane we saw last year, an increase of 9.1% on a year-over-year basis for the median sold price there. In contrast, look at Jacksonville, Florida, an increase of only 2.5%. Miami, Florida, a gain of 4.2%. Naples, Florida is actually one of the metros in which prices increased the most from February last year, a gain of almost 11%. In Orlando, an increase of 5.3%. And in contrast, look at this. Pensacola, Florida, almost flat or almost negative compared to 1 year ago, a gain of only 0.7%. In Punta Gorda, a decrease of 4.8%. So home sold prices in Punta Gorda decreased by 4.8%. In Sebastian and also Vero Beach, more or less flat from 1 year ago as well. The same for Tallahassee, Florida as well. In the greater Tampa area, a gain of only 3.1%. And again, in contrast here, the Villages metro area, a decrease of 8.8%. And with that said, please comment below your biggest takeaways from today's video. Also, if you guys got any value of this video whatsoever, then please hit the like button. I really appreciate that. Of course, I appreciate you. Hope you guys have an awesome day. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.